we all, or many of us, feel that the world could be better. That with all the resources we have, all the ideas we have, all the goodwill that we have, I think certainly when we're children, and then people sort of try to hammer this out of us. But I think that we all feel that, come on, of course the world, we read about the fact that some people don't have drinking water. Like, really? We have space flight and we don't have water? I mean, come on.
Ami, thank you so much for being here with me today. I really do appreciate it.
Thank you.
I mean, you took the train in from New York. Do you live in New York?
I do.
Predominantly?
Yeah, I do, yes.
Do a lot of travel?
Not that much, actually.
Really?
I find travel sort of disruptive in terms of work. I'm also, I got married quite late in my life, and we have dinner every night at home with my wife, my daughter. It's a pretty little sacred little ritual that we have.
Oh, that's great.
And so I don't travel that much. We used to have an office in Portland. We don't anymore. I had a long-distance relationship with my wife before I married her. She was in Spain. Now they're here for the last 3 years, so I travel actually relatively little.
Wow. You had a long-distance relationship. How did you meet?
I was on vacation there, and I had friends who lived there. And then she was a very good friend of theirs. And later on, there was a baptism for a daughter of theirs. And so I was there, and she was there, and then we started talking. And then we talked some more, and then I came back here, and then lots of phone calls, and then I went back, and yeah. And I knew right away. I knew in the first phone call, which is interesting.
No kidding.
Oh, yeah.
What tipped you off?
I don't know. I really don't. Yes, we sort of chatted for a few days online. Then we talked on the night of New Year's, actually, like at 1 a.m. She put her daughter to bed, and we talked like 4 a.m. When I hang up, I was like, I'm going to spend the rest of my life with this person. This is it. She doesn't know it yet, but that's what's going to happen. Took her about a month more
to get on board.
To get on board, yes. To feel the same way. And here we are.
Yeah.
So it's good. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I love to hear that. And I love that you immediately, said you carve out this, is it pretty much nightly or as often as you can to do a family dinner?
It's been essentially nightly. I mean, I have to, this will sound insane to you, and I'm afraid of saying this, but in the last 3 years, I think I've been away from home for 6 nights.
Wow. Now, for context for the listener, my wife is in the room, and she usually isn't during this, and I can't see her because she's sitting behind me. She must be seething right now.
No, she's laughing.
She's not. She's laughing.
Yeah. We travel together as a family quite a bit on vacations and stuff. But me alone, I think it's been 6 nights in 3 years, basically. There's no reason. I mean, I do stuff online. Video is awesome.
Yeah.
My work is here. My office is here. I'm not a big fan of conferences. I think they're mostly a waste of time, honestly. And so I don't travel a lot, recently at least.
I aspire to that, to be honest. So let me back that up, though. So you've been running Idealist.org, and what is the organization actually called? Is it
Idealist.org? Yeah, is the name. Yeah.
Idealist.org, and is it Action Without Borders?
That was a formal name that we gave it 20 years ago. It's known as Idealist.org right now. Everyone knows it as Idealist.org. Yeah.
Okay, right. So Idealist.org. When did you actually found it?
95. A long time ago. Yeah.
Yeah, but in terms of the digital revolution, it's amazing what's happened since then.
Yep.
And it strikes me as you were talking about the fact that you really don't need to travel much to have this global connection enterprise that you run and you oversee. Maybe talk me through what's changed in the world for better or for worse since you launched it.
What changed for better or for worse? My God, it's been 25 years, so so much has changed. I think in the world. I think. In technology, I mean, obviously all of us can communicate better than before, easier than before. I have some mixed feelings about the whole. I'm not sure that we're actually more productive than before, actually. There's this guy who writes for The New Yorker. His name is Adam Gopnik, and he's about 60-something. And so his writing career has gone on from when he was working on a typewriter and faxing or mailing in his stuff to, today. And he had an essay a couple of years ago where he went back through his diaries, with his journals, looking back at his career and at the number of articles that he actually got published every year. And he found that, in fact, he was more productive when he was using a typewriter and a fax machine than he is today. primarily, I think, because there are far fewer distractions, right? So I think, it's also hard to talk about this stuff without talking cliches because everything has been said. But I think we're all really distracted all the time now. If you think today about people like, I don't know, people, 200 years ago, someone like Jefferson, right? Franklin, people who were extraordinarily productive. Well, of course they were. Their phone there was no phone. You could just sit in your house and concentrate for hours and no one would interrupt you. Yeah. So I think we're definitely more distracted. We're also more connected, for good and for bad. We can spread wonderful things. We can also spread hate, and we can spread rumors, and we can spread fake news. So I think it's a complicated thing. One of the things that I do see that I think is definitely there. If I look at the last 20 years, I think the internet has allowed annoying people to be more annoying than before. In other words, someone who just used to be sort of, just this annoying person that you'd run into once in a while, now they can get on Twitter and they can be annoying all the time. So that's definitely a big change.
Yeah, annoying people can definitely be more annoying. Is that because the people that each of us find annoying are the ones with differing opinions, and we're just seeing that more often?
I don't think it's a question. Well, personally, I don't think it's a question of opinion. I think you can have a different opinion than I do and not be annoying. I think you can have a very similar opinion to mine and be extremely annoying. In other words, I think we all there's certain ways in which people can be annoying, self-promotional. For example, a pet peeve that I have, just personally, people on Twitter who tweet or retweet compliments to themselves. I mean, come on, what is that? Really? Would you do that in the real world? Would you go around just like yelling, so-and-so said I was great? Really? It's just weird. So anyway, we all find what we think is annoying. But I think obviously what the internet does, what modern communications do is they amplify, right? They amplify everything. And so someone who was quiet before is as quiet now. Someone who was vocal before is amplified for good or for bad. And so that's obviously, I think, a huge change. So the small number of people who make the most noise now can make much more noise for good and for bad.
Let's step back for a second because so much of what you're talking about is really built into Idealist.org and some of your more recent programs and initiatives and things you're trying to do. Why don't you take us back for a second? If you're at a cocktail party, a social gathering, and someone asks you these days, "Oh, I saw that face. You don't go to social gatherings, no?"
Once in a while.
Once in a while. Let's say you were. Imagine you were, and someone asked you, "What do you do?"
Yeah.
How would you answer these days?
I would say that I run a nonprofit called Idealist.org that connects people all over the world with organizations and with ways to volunteer, to work. It connects organizations around the world with people that want to help them out or get connected in some way. It connects people who want to do good with ways of doing good. That's what I do.
That's great.
Yeah.
How so Idealist.org is predominantly for finding jobs, finding volunteer opportunities. It's a way of bridging the gap between the people who have those jobs and opportunities or are looking for someone to do them and the people who want to go out and do them.
Right.
Is that
all nonprofit? Yeah.
All nonprofit. So I want you to take me back to how that came about, because I know the story is relatively well documented, but I think people would be really interested to hear, how it started, where it came from. Like, what was going on in your life leading up to that? What were you doing before you launched it? Maybe we can start there.
Yeah, not much. I think that so there are a couple of important points I think to sort of start from. One is very early on. So I was born in Israel. Then when I was 7, we went to live in Mexico. My father went to work there for the UN, and ever since I think I was 7 or 8 years old, I was like this little social justice freak. I basically we in the streets in Mexico at the time, there were lots of kids my age who were begging. And I didn't understand why. And so we would stop at every red light in the street, every traffic light, and there'd be kids outside begging for food, for money. And I didn't understand why. And I would ask my parents, why are these kids begging? I remember one night my dad was driving in traffic. It was raining hard. You could hardly see outside the car. And we stopped at a traffic light somewhere. And this kid, sort of my age, came to the car and he put his hands on the windshield in such a way that his face was like an inch away from mine, the other side of the windshield. And he was looking at me, and he somehow wanted me to help him. And I was like 8 years old. And dude, I can't help you. I'm 8 years old. And then my dad just drove away. And I remember his face, and I remember this feeling of impotence, of not knowing how I could actually help out. And that stayed with me. And then my whole childhood, I kept sort of asking and looking and thinking. And the thing is, when you're like 10, I think when I was like 10 or 11, I decided I was going to leave school. I was going to go into the mountains. I was going to start a guerrilla movement. And I was going to just like basically take over Mexico and sort of change everything. And the thing is that when you're 10, and you want to start a revolution, people don't take you seriously, and when you're 10, you're very offended that people don't take you seriously, but it's just the way it is. So I waited, and then we went back to Israel, and then when I was 18, I had to go into the army for 3 years, did that. And then there was a very specific...
Well, hang on.
Yeah, sorry.
I think you're so used to telling your own story. You were in the army in Israel.
Yep.
Can you give us a little bit more about that? Because I think that's totally unusual to most people.
I'm going to, so basically we went back to Israel, which is where I was from. We went back at 15 for high school. And then when you're 18, and certainly when I was younger, all men had to go for 3 years, and all women had to go for 2 years, which is just the way it is. You don't think about it. You don't question it, certainly not then. It's hard to explain to someone who's not from there, but it's as deeply part of your trajectory as kindergarten, primary school, and high school is here. Like here, you have it embedded in your head that you go to high school and then maybe you go to college, but you absolutely go to high school. So there, it's high school, army, and then life. It's just the way it is. And certainly when I was there 30, 40 years ago, no one was refusing. There'd been a big war in '73 earlier, where Egypt and Syria invaded, and so you felt you're protecting your family. So anyway, it was the normal thing to do. And I was sort of brought up in that way. So I went and I served for 3 years. And two, I think, big things happened during those 3 years, to me at least. One, about a year later, about a year after, a year in, I was in this position where my unit that I had joined, we were on the northern border of the country. It's a border with Syria. And my job was to spend several hours on this watchtower every day alone. And, there was no cell phones. I'm just alone, this watchtower. And I was supposed to be looking at the horizon across, barbed wire, minefields, and in the distance there are Syrian sort of bases, and I'm supposed to just look across the border for hours and see if anything strange happens. That was the job. And one day I had this thought that sort of made me laugh out loud. I remember I was alone in this tower, and suddenly I burst out laughing. And I laughed because a little background here is that a few months earlier, as I was getting to know the guys in my own unit, I realized that some of them are, great guys that I would just like trust with my life. And we've all met people like that in our life. You run into someone like, oh my God, this person is like my kind of person. And other guys, I was like, eh. And the way I thought about it in my head was that some of these guys would, and I knew it, they would give me their last pair of dry socks if I ever needed them. Some of them might steal mine if they needed them. And that's how I thought about them. And I had this like image in my head. And so one day I was up on the tower, I was looking through the telescope, and I don't know if the Syrian soldiers in the distance in this valley, they had a few hours off and they were playing soccer. And I could see them playing. I could even hear some laughter coming up sort of across the mountain. And there was something in that moment that completely humanized them in my eyes. And this is, again, hard to explain if you haven't been there, although right now we're all so polarized that maybe this makes more sense. When you grow up in a conflict zone or in a polarized society, it's very natural to dehumanize the other side. They're not exactly human. If you saw them as human as you are, it'd be very hard to fight them. You can fight them because they're not exactly human. And so I'm seeing them playing, they become completely humanized in my eyes. And suddenly I have this flash and I think, wait a second. If I want to join them now, there would also be some guys there that might share their socks with me and some others that wouldn't. There might also be the same kind of good guys and not that I have in my unit. And in that sense, this whole fence between us is running the wrong way. What if all the good guys got on one side and all the other ones on the other? I mean, I have never met those guys on the other side, those Syrians. I don't want to fight them. I don't want to shoot any of them. There's some guys on my unit who, if I had to shoot somebody, I wouldn't mind. I mean, I've actually met them. So I laughed out loud. And of course, afterwards I realized, and I know, decades later, that life is more complicated. And that in fact, it's not really about good people and bad people. There's a constant struggle between good and bad within each of us. And yet, I still think that all over the world, there are people who share some very, very basic values around love and freedom and dignity and solidarity and joy. And if those people could somehow work together, the world would be a better place. So that long story, that happened in the army. Then there was a war in Lebanon a couple of years later that was pretty bad. When I left that, I went traveling in South America for a couple of years. It's a very common thing after the army to go backpacking for a while. I tend to overdo things, so I spent a couple of years out there. And that's when this was the end of this piece of the story. This was the mid-'80s, and I was traveling across South America for a long time. And I started meeting people, locals, international people traveling, tourists, who wanted to do something about everything they were seeing that was wrong with the world. And there was no obvious way to do it. I mean, before the web, certainly, where do you start? What do you do? And so I was 24. I was trying to figure out what to do with my life. I hated school since I was a little child. So I dropped out of high school.
What was it that you didn't like about school?
Everything. I will tell you a little story. So when I was 3, I was in kindergarten. This was actually in Peru. Doesn't matter. I was in kindergarten, and we lived very close to the school. So after a couple of weeks in kindergarten or whatever preschool, when I was 3, this is actually a story for your wife. I accidentally pooped my pants. And so the teacher, since I was only a couple of blocks from school, decided that instead of doing anything about it in the school, they would just take me home and drop me and whatever, that was it. So I totally realized what happened. And so next day I did it again. And I did it again for the following 10 days until I realized something very wrong is going on here. I realized that pooping my pants was a free ticket home from school. And that was basically my relationship with school for the following 15 years. I stopped doing that, but I never liked. I was bored. I was the kind of kid whose only sort of overarching ambition is for all the adults in the world to just leave me alone. Why can't they just leave me alone? Who are they to tell me that I have to go to school, that I have to do this, that I have to do? Just leave me alone. I want to read my books.
Yeah. I was just going to say, what did you wish you could be doing?
Yeah, I want to read my books. I want to dream my dreams. Just leave me alone. So I got good grades anyway, but 11th grade I dropped out of high school, and so college was not going to happen. So I'm 24, and I'm thinking what to do with my life. And I realized and it was just this flash of intuition one day, backpacking in the south of Chile. I realized there has to be a way of connecting all these great people with each other and with ways of doing good. How? I haven't got the faintest idea because I'm 24, I have no money, no contacts, no nothing. There is no internet. It's funny to think about this. I don't know the internet will be invented, right? It's this weird thing. You're pre-web. You don't know the web will be invented. What you have are some fax machines and some PCs. I mean, how do you even think about this, right? There's this great science fiction writer called William Gibson, I think, who says that it's become hard to imagine that for young people today, younger people, it's easier to imagine, truly imagine and visualize a world with flying cars than a world with no internet. A world where your mother can't find you is unimaginable. The world that I grew up in, where basically you would meet someone at a youth hostel, you'd have a wonderful conversation, all night, and then you'd say goodbye in the morning, and both of you would know that you would never see or find each other again. Your only option would have been to write letters. Who's going to write a letter to someone who you had so you couldn't friend them. This was it. I spent 2 years traveling in South America in the mid-'80s, and I had a deal with my parents where I would call once a month to tell them I was okay. And when you're 24, 23, 22, I wasn't very sort of conscious. Today, I think about my poor mother, who for 29 days every month didn't know if I was alive until the following first of the month. She would hang up the phone knowing that for a month, she wouldn't be able to know if I was alive or not until I appeared the following month. And this is only 30 years ago. This is how we lived. And today, that reality of basically, in 2 years, I made 20 phone calls once a month. That's unimaginable for younger people today. But that's how we lived. That was life.
Yeah.
So in that reality, thinking, how do you get all the good people to do good things? I had no idea, but I was going to figure it out. The great thing was that the moment it hit me, I never had a doubt again. It was very similar to the moment when I realized that my wife was it. It was this moment of this flash of recognition. Oh, this is what I want to do with my life. And I never looked back. And there was this complete peace. Then I went back to Israel and I had to make, and how do I do this? I don't know. So I started writing and thinking and I had to make a living. So I was a translator, I was a waiter. Then a friend started a software company, so I joined him. Anyway, and then the web was invented and that was that.
So incredible. I mean,
sorry.
No, please. No, I could have listened. I could have listened to you continue telling that story on and on and on and on. I have so many questions that I think would be maybe some of them just more my own curiosities, but more to the point of what we're here talking about. The web was invented. So when the web was invented, you had a moment where this idea that had been in the back of your head while you were working at your friend's software company, you realized, what was it about the web that made you realize like, oh, this is it, I can do this now?
Right. So it was actually this, again, another sort of flash of not intuition, just seeing something. I've been thinking forever, how do you do this? And so I thought, again, pre-web, I've been writing about this, sort of try to publish a book about it, doesn't matter, a long time ago. We should have these like neighborhood centers. Why is it that in every town in the world you have a grocery store where you can go and you can buy, milk and coffee, and you don't have to go to 5 dairy farms and do coffee research. You just go to the grocery store. They take care of having the stuff on the shelves. Why can't we have a place in every community, I call it a community point, where you would walk in and you would find, your neighbors, a bulletin board, and all the ways in which you could do good in that one place without having to do the research. So I was thinking of different ways to do it sort of in the real world and running into all kinds of obstacles. I came to New York in 92 thinking I could make it happen here. That's not a long story. I started running around the city knowing no one, but sort of asking nonprofits around the city, if you had a place in every neighborhood to put your stuff, would you do it? Would you do it? And they were like, sure. So then I went to community centers and said, if the nonprofits, sure. So this classic chicken and egg thing, and I was just trying to make this happen in real life. And then one day a friend came to my house and said, I need to show you this thing. It's called the web. I was like, whatever. So he went to the jack on my wall, to the phone jack, and he had a little modem with him, and he basically connected me. He put me online for the first time in my life. This was 93 or so, and he sort of got online. And when the web was first invented, the first web browsers, for those, in your audience, again, we're dating ourselves here, but basically, 25 years ago, computer screens, you had essentially this green text on a screen. And the web at the very first, was like that. There wasn't even any sort of graphical interface. What the web consisted of were words on a page, like a page of text. And one of those words glinted, it shined. And that was a link. And so he went to this website. There were only a few thousand websites in the world. He brought up this website, and then one word was weird. It looked weird to me. And he clicked on it. And when he clicked on it, it went somewhere else. And I was like, oh my God, I have been waiting for this for 10 years. Yes. And that was sort of it. And then in that moment, a few months later, by the summer of 94, 95, about 2,000 nonprofits in the world had set up websites. The bigger innovative ones, Greenpeace, Amnesty, people like that. But there was no search engine of any sort. There was Yahoo where you would click around.
Yeah, Yahoo's a database, right? It was
Yahoo was basically
engines.
clicking.
Yeah.
You'd click around. You'd be like, I want to see what plays are playing in New York. So you'd click on the United States, click on New York, click on theater, click on plays, and then you'd click to your play. And so I thought, wow, what if there was a place where you could go and find all nonprofits in the web? So that neighborhood idea, the community point, an online place to find all nonprofits. So I found a couple of interns from Columbia and Barnard and sat them down for a summer and say, go out there into the world and find every nonprofit website that exists in different places. Again, there was no search engine. We just go and find 3 here and 2 there. And so then we launched in early 95 this directory, this very simple directory of the 2,500 nonprofits that we found in the world. And we didn't want to launch it before we had at least one in all 50 states. Today, it sounds funny to actually have to make an effort to find one nonprofit in a state that has a website. It was hard. For those of you who have ever done anything like this, to try to find something in all 50 states, there are 2 states in the U.S. that will always give you trouble. One is Mississippi because it's the poorest.
Yeah.
And one is North Dakota because I think no one lives there. I think it's a myth that people live there. And you can try to find something in North Dakota. Now someone's going to yell at the podcast and say, I live there.
No,
we'll look forward to hearing from you.
They're not, because I make fun of North Dakota all the time.
All the time.
I have
go.
a bunch of clients there. There's nothing there.
So we found in the end, one is Mississippi, one North Dakota, and like 100 countries, and we launched this thing. And it was very simple. You'd click on a country or click on an issue, and you'd find websites like that. Then we added search, and then it took off from there.
So when you say it took off, what happened? I'm so fascinated with this because I'm like, I was born in the wrong era. I mean, I'm an internet kind of, junkie, and I'm obsessed with the history of the internet. My parents are both computer scientists. My father was at the forefront of supercomputing and things like that. So it's I when I was a kid, none of my friends had a computer, and the few that didn't know how to type. I could type without looking when I was 5, and
I still can't type.
Right. So I was brought up with the internet and with computers and that knowledge like 5 to 8 years before everyone else I knew. When I was in high school, this is how new this stuff is. When I was in high school, we still had to take a typing class and an internet class. We had to learn how to use the World Wide Web, and that's not that long ago in history. Like, if high school feels like a long time ago to me, but in terms of history, it wasn't that long ago. So when you say it took off, like what happened next? How are you funding it? Are you making a profit? Like, what's going, like, did you like sell your house to, what's going on?
Let's see. So several things are going on. First, on this issue of that you just said about the internet and typing and stuff. One fascinating change, which I'm curious if other people here have sort of seen the last few years, is that in the office now we have about 30 people in the office in New York, and we have people of different ages, so different slight different generations, and it's wonderful how you have people who are more in their 30s, and they actually learned how to type in school, and they type blind and stuff. My daughter now is 15. She's a total internet native, and no one is teaching her how to type. She's in school. They don't know how to type. They sort of pick away at their tablets and at their phones. They don't actually type, which is sort of fascinating. So now there's this younger generation that actually in many cases can't type, truly type, the way that youth 35-year-olds in the U.S. can. Yeah. And I'm so jealous. I can't type. I type with 2 fingers, which is stupid, but that's the way it is. So anyway, just about that. What happened? What happened was that I came here in 92 to the U.S. I came on a business trip. I was working for this friend in Israel that had this software company, and we took a business trip here. It was in the fall. It was a beautiful week in the fall of 91, actually. And we spent a week in New York. And I say it was the fall because I felt completely in love with the city. I think had I come in August, I probably would have never moved to New York. But I came in the fall, in October. It was gorgeous. I was like, I want to live here. This feels like a cool place. And it feels like a place that will be open to big new ideas. So I went back to Israel. It took me a few months to sort of pack my world. And I moved to the U.S. Very naively, I came here with my life savings of $2,000. In hindsight, sort of a joke. I knew no one. I didn't have a work visa. And I came here in the summer of 92. I started walking the streets. I didn't have money for subway tokens. So I budgeted 2 tokens a day for myself. And I would go and try to meet people and tell them that, we could change the world together. Yeah. So anyway, I spent 2 months doing that until I had $20 left. And I kept procrastinating with the idea of finding work of some sort. When I have less money, whatever, I'll find a job in a moving company or washing dishes or translating or something. So by the time I had $20 left, this friend of mine in Israel came to visit me, the founder of the software company. So I used the last $20 that I had to go pick him up at JFK. And by the way, one thing that's hard to explain here, I'm not a religious person, but there is this like constant faith here that things are going to work out. I came to the States. People ask me in Israel, well, what are you going to do there? What do you mean you're going to the States? It's going to work out. It's all going to work out. So I go to the airport with my $20 and we go out for dinner. And he says that the company's growing and he wants to open an office in the US. And so basically next day I have a job opening his office in the US. So it just worked out that way. And so we set up this company here. Now I'm sorry, I'm laughing. I told him, yes, I'm going to open your office here on the condition that I can work on your project 3 days a week, and 2 days a week I can still keep obsessing about mine. So he said, okay, go for it. Great. So then we started this trajectory for the next about 10 years, 10, 15 years, where I essentially had two jobs at the same time. I was the president CEO of this software company that I worked for that sold all kinds of stuff to software developers, doesn't really matter. And then at the same time in the same office, he supported what I was doing by letting me have a room where 2 or 3 other people could work doing this nonprofit stuff. And so I had to raise money for their salaries, but I did not have to worry about things like rent or internet connection, stuff like that. He took care of that. So it was very convenient. And so I still had to take care of them and sort of find money for them. So I didn't sell my apartment because I didn't have one, but I used pretty much all my savings. My mother wanted to kill me. My friend helped me out a little bit. And we survived on very little. From 95 through 2000, the total organizational budget was $100K a year. It's sort of a joke by normal standards in the US. We survived on that barely. Every 2 weeks I had to make payroll somehow. And what we were doing was free. In those days, again, sort of internet history, from 93, 94 till 2000, essentially everything on the web was free for everyone. Commerce sort of came later. And then towards the end of that decade, end of the century, people started testing the idea of selling things. And so we had grown to become this website that more and more people knew as a place to go and find a nonprofit job. Nonprofits, we had built Idealist in such a way that nonprofits could list their volunteer opportunities, their internships, their jobs, their programs, their events. People kept coming back for the jobs. And by the end of 99, we were having about 100 jobs a week listed on the site. But it was all free. And I couldn't pay. And then one day, I remember specifically, there was a job posted about the Carter Center, President's Carter organization. And I thought, they have a lot of money. And we have $300 in the bank, and I need to meet payroll. What if we charge them $40 to post their job? It wouldn't kill them, and maybe that would work. So we changed the system, and one day, October 16th, 99, very specifically, we posted our first invoice. We charged our first job, SEIU, the Service Employees Union. We'll have the honor forever having posted our first job in October of 99 for $40, which was a joke at the time, but whatever. So we charged $40, and then what happened, just basic supply and demand, basic economics. The following week, instead of having 100 jobs, we had 50. 50 decided we're not going to pay. But instead of having $0, we had 2,000. And suddenly, I could pay these 2 people without ever worrying again.
Right.
And that has been growing since. So that's a sort of longer story. So now it's more like 2,000 jobs a week. And we can pay 30 people, and we still basically make our money that way. We're a nonprofit, but we're essentially self-funded by the work that we do. We don't ask people for money, at least not now.
Yeah, that's amazing. I love that you mentioned faith, that you're not religious, but there's kind of a faith or spiritual aspect in there. I think that's something a lot of my audience would identify with. I have a lot of the folks who listen are young adults and young professionals, part of what you probably still call the millennial generation, and then the educators and administrators who work with them, who are probably more from your generation. But I think the younger folks tend to identify with faith and spirituality. Where did you get that faith? If you're not religious, where did that come from that this idea was the one that you just kept holding on to and ringing that bell? I
know a couple of things. One, so my mother, even though my parents were not formally religious, they were Jewish. My mother spent her whole life teaching the Bible to sort of adult women from a literary historical perspective, but from a values perspective. And my mom was definitely the most ethical person that I ever met by far. She was not only ethical, she was not only sort of a good person truly without talking about it, without making a big deal out of it. She also was great in that she could explain to you the ethics of something. Like most people that act in certain ways can't actually explain to you why sometimes something complicated is the right thing. She had this amazing ability to explain ethics in a way that was just awesome. So I think definitely sort of an ethical education, sort of based on the biblical Jewish perspective, was definitely there. Then later on, yes, sometimes of course a sense, going back and forth between the sense that we're not alone here, while not being involved in any specific, religious, so religious ritual. And then with this, it's hard to explain. Like I said, when I talked to my wife the first time, and I go, okay, this is going to be it. And here also a sense when this idea first hit me, I'm going to do this. It's going to happen. My mom used to say, that I'm the most stubborn person in the world, and I don't think it's stubbornness. I think it's faith. Sometimes you just know something, and you know it so deeply. The same way that you know your gender, that you know who you are. I am this. There are professions. I think there are jobs that somehow some people feel they choose. I choose to be, an endocrinologist as opposed to, another specialty. But sometimes someone will tell you, I'm a writer, I'm a poet, I am, whatever. I'm a chef, actually, as deeply as I am a woman, or as deeply as I am, an American. It's just a deep part of my soul. I can't imagine not being this, and I can't imagine not doing this work. I mean, this is sort of who I am. I'm never going to have another job. That's not going to happen. This is just what I do. Yeah. And so sometimes now that's harder to explain. The faith that things are going to work out. That's going to be okay. And the thing about that faith, of course, is that it's necessary, because without that faith, you give up sometimes. I mean, it's easy to give up, and so you need that faith. Now, the tricky part here is that that's okay as long as your idea is more or less a good one. One of the tragedies in life, and I think we've all met people like that, is people who have a terrible idea and have faith that it will work, and they spend their whole life pursuing something that is not going to happen. And so sometimes when you have an idea, it's really important to try to check out if it can work or not. I mean, and, talk to smart people and see what they think. And if no one agrees with you, then maybe ask yourself, what's going on.
Best advice I was ever given, and I'm curious how you feel about this, in terms of trying to figure out if an idea is a good one, because I think you just nailed I see the same thing. People who have faith, and 10 years later, some of my friends from 10 years ago are still struggling with the same idea. They just believe, but it's not working. It's been a long time, and it doesn't mean it won't work tomorrow. Some people try for 10 years, and then on the 11th year it works, but working out whether the idea is good or not is really hard. And best advice I was ever given was, one of my mentors said, if you're not sure whether your idea is good or not, go to the 10 people in the world who are most invested in you, your immediate family, your friends, right, your spouse, the 10 people who are most likely to want you to succeed, and tell them all your idea. And if none of them share your idea with somebody else, it's not a good idea, if it doesn't spread from that core group that's most invested in you. How do you feel about that?
Totally. I think that's one way, definitely. I think that it's a really tricky thing, right? Because we all have stories of ideas that no one thought would work, right? The world and the high-tech world is full of legends of ideas, the science world of things that basically people thought they were crazy, and yet they worked. And that's risky, because that can make you feel no matter what, things will work. I think there two sort of keys to this. One is whatever it is that you're trying to do, make, produce, sell, create, satisfy at least a need that you have. One of the riskiest of the dangerous ways of knowing that something's possibly not a good idea is that you want to make something that you don't really need, but you are sure that other people need. No. If even you wouldn't use what you're trying to make, if even it's not satisfying a hunger or a need that you have, that's probably not a great start. At the same time, though, I mean, I'll tell you sort of one quick thing. I've learned to be very careful about telling anyone else that their idea won't work. So I ask questions. People come to me and say, I have this idea. I'll ask some probing questions. I'll be inquisitive. But in 2000 specifically, this guy came out to see me in New York, and he worked for this thing called Craigslist, which I had never heard of, because Craigslist from 95 to 2000, 99 actually, was a San Francisco phenomenon. It was launched by Craig Newmark in 95 in San Francisco. And for 4 or 5 years, it existed only in San Francisco. And if you weren't from San Francisco, I mean, he was incredibly patient. It took him 5 years to decide to launch the second city, and the second city was New York. And it's also, by the way, really interesting from a different perspective of the history of ideas and science. Why in those 5 years no one anywhere copied the idea? Right? Those are fascinating questions. You have entire 5 years where something very simple is working in San Francisco, and no one takes this uncopyrighted idea and makes it work somewhere else. He doesn't do it, and no one else does it either. It's fascinating.
Yeah, that
so
is
this
weird.
guy comes to talk to me. It was very memorable for a couple of reasons, but this guy comes to talk to me as sort of an emissary from Craigslist. And we have an office in the Empire State Building. And he makes me meet him downstairs because he has a phobia of elevators. Okay, whatever. So we meet in this little restaurant downstairs. And he tells me about this thing called Craigslist that does this, that does that. And to me, it sounds like a totally sort of hippie San Francisco, whatever. People exchange bicycles and they give each other free things and whatever. And I will never do this again. I come out with my pronouncement. This will never work in New York. And basically, I declare knowingly that Craigslist is going to be a failure. And of course, it's been the most amazing success. And so that was the last time, that was my lesson of never telling anyone their idea won't work, because what do I know? But you can definitely ask people questions. And that can be helpful to everyone, I think.
So, Ami, we've been bouncing around talking about ideas, good ideas, bad ideas, pursuing things you're passionate about. I would really like to dig in on what your big idea is, what it has been with Idealist, and kind of what it is and what it's growing into lately. So you have a magnificent 30-minute talk that you gave just a few months ago.
You watched it?
I did. I watched it a couple of times in its entirety. Beautiful. And so, first of all, you're an excellent public speaker.
Whoa,
and,
okay.
No, you really are. And a little bit later...
You guys can't see me, but I'm blushing now.
I was totally captivated by it. And a little bit later, if we remember, if it makes sense, I'd love to come back and chat a little bit about like the art of speaking itself, because I think there's so much value in becoming an excellent communicator, especially in a world where we've been talking about, communication is kind of everywhere. We can communicate, but we're having trouble connecting, and I think there's a difference. But before we get to that, the talk was called Calling All Dreamers, right? I'd love to dig in a little bit, because I think you really outlined in that talk what Idealist has been, what it is, where it's going. So I'd like to start here. You said we all want different things, and that was one of the problems. So what did you mean by that, and why is that a problem?
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. It's a 30-minute thing, which I'll just to sort of go a bit of background. I think that basically, I think that we all, or many of us, feel that the world could be better. That with all the resources we have, all the ideas we have, all the goodwill that we have, I think certainly when we're children, and then people sort of try to hammer this out of us. But I think that we all feel that, come on, of course the world could be, we read about the fact that some people don't have drinking water. Like, really? We have space flight and we don't have water? I mean, come on. And I think intuitively, we all know that things could be better. But it's complicated. It's complicated because, as you just mentioned, for a couple of different reasons. One, we're many of us. We're almost 8 billion. We're not 20 nice people on some island somewhere. And those 8 billion each care about many things. When we say a better world or a better community, we actually mean thousands of different things: better schools, less poverty, more whales. We mean many different things. And then for each of those things, we have, many different opinions on how to solve them. We have egos and we have interests. So if you take, one small chunk of that, education in the US, even the best intentioned people get into sort of horrible fights about public, private, charter, homeschooling, whatever. And these are even the people who agree that every kid deserves a great education. That's out of those boundaries. You have those who say, well, whatever, my kids deserve a great education, your kids, whatever. So even those who agree, then, that's a problem. And so what I say in that talk is, given all this noise, given all this agreement, what are 3 or 4 or 5 things that all of us can agree on? And if we can agree on those things, then we can do some amazing stuff. So if it's okay, I mean, I can just say, one, I think there are some very fundamental values that I think that people all over the world, across religions, across nations, across languages, seem to agree on. And that is that all people should be able to lead a free and dignified life. Freedom and dignity seem to be something that most of us agree on. And some of us, or at least many of us, agree that getting there in a spirit of generosity and respect, mutual respect, would be great. So respect, generosity, dignity, and freedom, those values. Then how do we get there? There are three sort of problems or challenges that we can then turn into goals. One, there seems to be all over the world a big gap between intention and action. All of us every day see things that we would like to change, but for all kinds of reasons, we get busy, we have fears, we don't have time, and then we don't get involved. So we can close that gap. If we can help more people just do one small thing sometimes, that'd be great. Second is that the world is full of all kinds of amazing ideas that have worked in many places, but those ideas don't have marketing budgets behind them, and so we don't hear about them. Small ideas. You know, when my wife first came to New York, we went to a park, and it was one of those little signs that said, no adults allowed in the playground without an accompanying child. Right? You see what I mean? What are you as an adult doing alone in a playground? Where is your child? And she was like, oh my God, that is brilliant. Every playground in Spain should have this. But it hasn't occurred to anyone in Spain, and no one has seen this. And so the world is full of big and small ideas like that we just don't copy because we never hear about. And so how can we encourage, more sharing of more ideas? And lastly, I think, how do we make more connections? There's this image that I hope I can sort of just draw in words that sort of obsesses me, that I think about an apartment building anywhere in the world. And on the 10th floor and on the 5th floor, 6th floor, whatever, there are two people looking out their windows, and they're both seeing something out the window that they would like to change or make different. They would like to, build a garden. There's a corrupt policeman in the street, whatever. They're both seeing something that they would like to do something about. But they have no idea the person, 2 floors above or below them is thinking the same thing or a block away. And we have all this technology now, but we're not telepathic. It's amazing to me how Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, how all these technologies actually haven't solved that problem. We could all, in a city even, we can all be feeling the same thing, and we will never know. You see it, by the way, in meetings and committees. I mean, I'll just make a little side note here for a second. Is that okay? People talk about, in the world, we talk about evil and cruelty and bad decisions and horrible things that happen. One thing I really believe strongly is that most of the horrible things that happen in the world are decided by committees and not by individuals. An individual has a conscience. A committee doesn't have a conscience. You can always hide behind, if a group of people, if the board decided to, lay off half the company, you can always go home and tell your partner, your spouse, well, I was against it, but the majority voted for it, and what could I do? And then she or he will ask you, well, did you actually raise your hand and fight? Well, what was the point? I knew I was in the minority. And then you will not feel guilty. And the thing is that it's easy for 10 people to decide to do a horrible thing, and all 10 of them to fool themselves into thinking that it wasn't because of them, it was the other 9. And one of the amazing things that human beings haven't solved as a species is that we have no way of knowing what people around the table are thinking unless they actually say so. It's sort of amazing. One person can propose something, all 9 think it's the stupidest idea ever, and if they're afraid to say so, we'll never know. It's amazing. So anyway, how do you make more contacts between people? And so if you take this picture again of this building, how do you get 2 people to actually connect, then move to action, and then implement an idea that maybe somebody else has had, and they could actually do where they are. So we can agree, again, is dignity, freedom, generosity, and respect. We can agree on more action, more ideas, and more connections. And that's really what that talk is about. I don't know. I can say more, but I'll let you ask a question once in a while.
Well, no, I was blown away by the whole concept. I love the idea that there's kind of 3 things that we can all agree on. So cap us off or give us a quick recap of what the actual 3 things were.
So we can agree, I think, on more action, more connection, more ideas. Where we are now, though, and this is, I think, what you're aiming at is, okay, so great, we can agree on that. Now, what can we actually do? What are the next steps?
Right.
And there, I think where we landed, and where I landed, after sort of a long time of thinking about this, is that I think that I really believe, and I know how this can sound, and partly because it's become such a big cliche, I really believe that we can change the world. I really believe that together we can build something that is much closer to what our intuition tells us is possible, if we agree on three simple things. And these are slightly different things. The first that I think we can agree on are those very broad and simple values I mentioned: more freedom and more dignity for more people. How? In many different ways, but more freedom and more dignity for all people, not just my people or your people, all people. So if you agree with that, awesome. Second, and that only happened more recently because of this group that we launched on Facebook that sort of led us there.
The group is called?
Idealists of the World on
Idealists of the World.
Idealists of the World on Facebook.
And
yeah,
anybody can go on Facebook?
Join it. Yeah, there's 40,000 people there doing amazing things around the world.
I will make sure that there's a link to that in the show notes as well. But it's easy to find. I joined it yesterday. So
thank you so much. So Idealists of the World. And so anyway, so the first thing is a set of values. Then imagine, I know this takes a bit of a sort of imaginative jump. Imagine if those values, the freedom and dignity, had a symbol, had a logo. And this is interesting. All of us know the power of symbols, of logos, right? Anything from the smiley sign, the incredible success of the recycling logo, which is another sort of amazing story, the incredible success of the rainbow flag and what's that meant for many people. And it's interesting that these values of dignity and freedom that we all want, that every day you open a newspaper, somewhere, someone in the world is fighting for freedom and dignity. Imagine if those people shared a symbol, a logo that you saw anywhere, and you're like, oh my God, these are my people. They're fighting for the same things I believe in. And by you wearing, flashing, chalking, painting that logo, you'd be expressing, I am with you. I am here for you. I see you, basically. So values, and then a symbol to express them, to allow us to actually see each other. Because right now, we're divided in so many ways, by nationality, by religion, by ethnicity, that we've lost the ability of even seeing each other. We don't see humans, we just see labels. Mm-hmm. If you're suddenly wearing, or I see on your window this symbol, then I know that we're together in this. And then thirdly, a day a month, we call them Idealist Days. And it's a very specific, it's a long story how it happened. But it turned out, how in different parts of the world, dates are complicated, because if you say 7/6, it means July 6th in the US, but it means June 7th in Europe.
Yep.
But 7/7 is the same in both places. And so we realized that a couple of years ago, and we, quote unquote, we grabbed those days, 2/2, 3/3, 4/4, 6, every month, and we're calling them Idealist Days, a day once a month where we're inviting people around the world to do one small thing to make things a little bit better. And, it can be a big thing. You can organize a whole big event, or it can be a small thing. And one trick here, again, in sort of quotes, is to define this in a way that is so small, and small in quotes, because I really believe that nothing is small. Mm. The world is nothing but the sum of all our actions. And so every little action counts. But if you define it in a way that is so small that no one can tell themselves or others that they didn't have time to do this. I mean, if you're thinking about a monthly, day of action, then, it's okay if the next time 9/9, 10/10, 9/9 is today, but 10/10, 11/11. If you just say, what I'm going to do next month is I'm going to spend 5 minutes thinking about what I'll do the following time. Yeah. That counts too. Mm-hmm. Smile at someone that you wouldn't have smiled at. Ask. If your office building has a doorman, ask him his name for the first time. You've been wanting to do this, all the way to much bigger things. And that's because I think human beings, sometimes it's helpful to have a milestone, to have a deadline, and to have social permission. One of the sort of trickiest things about human beings is that sometimes, you could knock on a neighbor's door. You know where your neighbor is. You could write an email. You could put out a flyer for many things at work, at home, in school. Do you feel it's okay? Do you feel you have social permission to do this? Or is it awkward? Is it weird? People, I think human beings spend so much effort and time and money building up status, right? We spend our lives trying to be liked, trying to build up our social, capital, our social status, that the older we get, the more we're afraid of losing social status, of suggesting something And then people will think, oh my God, that's stupid, or you're going to fail in public. And so having social permission, having a day a month where everyone knows that this is the day in which many people will suggest many things would, I think, be really helpful. So to summarize, freedom and dignity for all, a symbol to represent that, and once a month, an opportunity to turn those values into action. That's what we are proposing.
And you're calling them Idealist Days.
Idealist Days, yes.
Yeah, so 1-1-2-2-3-3, and as long as everything goes to plan, as you mentioned, today that you're listening to this, the day that this launched should be 9/9, which is an Idealist Day. So what do you think somebody, if they wanted to take advantage today, if they're listening to on the day that this podcast launched, what could they do today? I mean, you mentioned, get your doorman's name,
Sure.
something as simple as that, compliment someone on there. I tell people all the time, you're going to be in line at Starbucks or whatever, instead of just going, here's $3, give me a cup of coffee, just take an extra second to say, hey, what's your name, by the way?
Of course.
I tell people that all the time. They go, oh, it's John. You say, John, thanks so much. It's amazing how in 3 seconds of just getting someone's name and saying their name back to them, you can feel the energy shift, and it sounds spiritual, and I'm not, and I don't mean it in that way, but you do feel something bigger than yourself happen, don't you?
Yeah. So I mean, let me talk about today, but also next month, the month after that. One of the beautiful things of doing this thing monthly is that you never miss out, right? You can do it next month. You missed out 1 month, you can do it next. You don't have to do it every month. You can do it whenever you want. And so, in fact, if today is 9/9, go simply to idealist.org/99. And you'll see what people around the world are doing there. We have this map there. We have this live map where you can click and you can see what people are doing everywhere. And then you will be able to see idealist.org/1010, 1010, what happens next month. You can then, sort of add your own action. You can participate in events, etc. So yes, you can do very small things, also bigger things. Volunteer, look for a place to volunteer, organize your neighbors to do something, raise your hand at work and say, hey, why don't we have a recycling program here? What's up with that? Make a suggestion, go on social media and actually say you'd like to participate in something. And if you work for an institution of any sort, I mean, there's so many ways. If you yourself are at a nonprofit, post an event for the next Idealist Day. If you work for the media, how about once a month on Idealist Day, your radio station, TV station, you run a story about a great local nonprofit doing great work. Why? Because it's Idealist Day. Why not? So there's so many ways of approaching this. And when we talk to people, one way in which you see that this is possibly a good idea, back to your example before, is that people immediately start shooting back at you their own variants, their own ideas. So, recently someone said, which I was like, I smiled, I thought, ooh, that's interesting. He said, what if this got big enough? Imagine if this got big enough that once a month in New York, whoever wanted to went into the subway on their way to work and they actually wore a name tag. Just that. And I would see your name. And if I wanted to, I would smile and I would say hello or not. But at least I would see that you are a human being with a name, right? Or another idea that we had recently, what if on those days, this idea of Apple had this big campaign a long time ago that was called Think Different. Mm-hmm. And so what if we had a campaign that was called Eat Different? And what we mean by that is find someone different than you and have dinner with them. As simple as that. And we try to organize and sort of make that happen, better. But like in a place like New York, when does a Dominican family ever have dinner with a Korean family? Never. What if they actually host each other, on that day? Why not? There's so many ways and we could, cross and bridge. And then you can get to much bigger stuff. People can organize, rallies and picnics and protests. And it can get big, it can be small. The point is that all of us can do something. And one thing that surprised us, we started doing this last year, was yes, you've had to organize things, people going out, cleaning highways, cleaning beaches, feeding kids, building a school. But then I think probably the single most surprising one to me was a man who posted, I think it was on 1010 last year, and he said, I've wanted to stop drinking for 20 years. Well, today is my last, today was my last drink. I am not drinking anymore. And he used that excuse of Idealist Day for that, which I found both moving and fascinating. So I think once you have this thing in your head that at least once a month, we're going to think of how to make things better, then I think much more good can happen.
I love that last example because that speaks to the fact that you don't have to go out and try to making things better for the whole world, making things better for others is great, but sometimes just making things better for yourself indirectly makes the world a better place, makes things better for others. If you better yourself, then everyone in your circle is going to be better and feel better around you, and the ripples just go on and on. I'd love to take that idea and steer into the kind of the core theme or kind of the hook of this particular show, One New Person, which is all about chance encounters and ripple effects and that we have on each other, since we're dancing around that. You have so many stories. I could listen to your stories all day. Do you have a particular story that comes to mind of somebody you met, a person you met randomly in your life, and kind of the impact that it had on you, or you on them, or both? And you're welcome to take a second to think about that. It could be just some old lady you met on a bus once, you had a 5-minute conversation with, and it changed your life. For some people, they come on and tell me a story about, they bumped into the hiring manager at the job of their dreams. That's, I think, very cool, but much more rare. Do you have something in mind? Somebody?
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know why this one comes to mind. I'll tell you in a second. But I think one of the things that I do a lot. The reason why it's like almost hard for me to decide, because this happens quite a bit, is that one thing I've found is that people love talking about themselves, and I mean that actually in the best way. I know in English, when you say talk about yourself, it can have sort of a bad connotation. I think that people have stories, and people love telling their stories, and people love telling you about their work, people, etc. And this is, I think, in New York, which again, I know this audience is all over. In New York, it's very common to meet someone at a gathering, at a party, wherever, and they will start talking about themselves. They won't ask you a thing about yourself, which is sort of, I find fascinating. And I have to say, I like this. Because when I'm sitting by somebody in an airplane and we start talking, or I'm sitting somebody anywhere, and I get to ask them questions and they're happy to answer the questions, I get to learn so much. And I'm going to say something very selfish now. If they don't ask me about myself, I'm pretty happy, in the sense that I know my story. My story is boring. I've heard my story many times. I don't need to tell my story. And so if we have 2 hours together on this flight, I had a flight a couple of years ago that was awesome. It was this guy who flies a couple times a week, lives in Detroit. And he flies a couple times a week in and out to every city in this country, because he has this very specific job. He's a financial advisor to car dealerships. Works alone at home, and he advises car dealerships on their work. Okay, so I knew nothing about the depths of the car industry, the relationships between the dealerships and the producers, all the laws around this, 100 years of tradition, blah, blah, blah. So I spent 2.5 hours from Portland to Detroit interviewing him, basically, about his life. And he gave me a 2-hour lesson about the depths of the car industry in this country that I would have never known. And he didn't ask me a single question. But from my point of view, those 2 hours were well spent, because they were entirely spent on him. And that was fantastic. And so I do this a lot. I'll tell you one story that I don't know why it came to mind, and it sort of stuck with me. A few years ago, I was looking for a place to live in New York, for an apartment. I ended up renting this place in this brownstone in the city. And the landlady was an older woman. She must have been about 80 then. And there was something about her that reminded me very much of my mother. She must have been, well, I know exactly, actually. She was 13 years older than my mother would have been at the time. My mother, passed away 20 years ago. It doesn't matter, but at the time, yeah, so at the time, this woman was like 80, and she was my mother's height. She was my mother's sort of shape, and when she met me, there was this immediate sort of chemistry, and she said, "Oh yes, please come live here." And then she immediately hugged me, which I thought was sort of just wonderful. And I came to live there, and it was great. And then about a year later, I was sitting on the stoop, and she was coming back from having dinner somewhere, and so we, sat and chatted. She just chatted with me for a second. And somehow we landed on when and where she had been born. So she was born in 1926 in Poland, 1923, in Poland before the war. And she started telling me about her escape from the Nazis and stuff. And at some point, I asked her, sort of, when were you born? And she said August of 23. And I got this like weird feeling because my mother was born August 12th, and I asked her, so what day in August? And the weird thing is that there was like 10th of a second. You know how sometimes you spill a cup, you spill a glass, and there's this moment where your eyes know that it's going to flip, but your hand is too slow to stop it, and you're aware that you messed up. And so there was this moment where I asked her what date, and I knew she was going to say the 12th. It was the weirdest thing. And she said the 12th. And it's the strangest story to me because I don't believe in astrology. I don't. But a year earlier, she had reminded me of my mom. I thought about her the whole year, someone who reminds me of my mom. And then it turns out that she was born the same day as my mom, 16 years earlier. And it was just, I don't know, I can't explain it. It was incredibly moving, weird and wonderful. So that's your story.
Weird and wonderful. And you're still thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, you asked me, so that one came to mind for some reason. That's something that was just like, wow, okay.
Why did that come to mind? I mean, what about that? It's so interesting. That's the second time in our conversation that you've cautioned a story with, I don't really believe in this stuff, but I don't really believe in this, but. So how did these faith moments how do these keep coming up? What is that? Why do you think?
I don't know. Like I knew, I mean, I know that, some of your listeners, of course, may believe in astrology, and that's totally fine. I just find it hard to believe that, that we're neatly divided into 12 ways of being. I think we're more complicated. I know astrology is also more complicated than that. Anyway, so of course, the paradoxical thing here is that of course, if any listener here believes in astrology, she's like, you see, of course. So that's great. Awesome. You got it. You got me. But I don't know. To me, it was more the weirdness of the moment of knowing. I knew she was going to say that, and she did. And so the moment she said it, in a sense, it was less surprising because I knew it was coming in the strangest way. So I don't know. That's why I feel that without essentially being part of an organized ritual or an organized religion, sometimes I feel that life is more complicated than we may think. One thing to say about this, again, without in any way offending anyone or anything, I think that sometimes, atheists, sort of, very like strong believing sort of atheists who are convinced there is nothing out there, they sort of make me smile because they remind me of deeply religious people. In other words, how do you know? I mean, what how are you so sure one way or the other? I don't get it.
Kind of conviction just on the other side.
Exactly. And so in that sense, I am sort of much more deeply agnostic. I just admit that I don't know. I don't know. I mean, some things make me think, really? I mean, are we alone? Or really? I mean, I get the whole evolutionary science. I totally understand it. And yet, I totally understand, what happens between bacteria and sort of, us and how we get here. But then the Ninth Symphony comes along. And sort of I understand how the hand of an orangutan or a chimpanzee evolves into our hand. I get that. I get how we can hold onto a branch and, eat an apple. I get that. But from that to Bach, from that to Mozart, from that to Rembrandt, I don't know. Yeah. And so that, and again, people can sort of, ridicule this one way or the other, but I just don't know. I'm not sure, and I shy away from being sure one way or the other.
Why do you think so? I feel like so many people are afraid to say I don't know about anything.
Oh my God, that's a huge that's a huge pet peeve. I mean, that's the curse of our time. I mean, that's a curse of punditry. That's a curse of Sunday morning shows, right? I mean, basically, everyone wants or needs to be an expert on anything, and I feel truly, I'm not saying this in any sense of full modesty, that the older I get, the less I know. I read this wonderful paragraph that someone whose name I unfortunately can't remember, this writer who was in China for 10 years, and he said, when I was here for a year, I felt, oh my God, I've learned so much. I can write a book about China with great certainty. And then he said, after 5 years, I felt I could write an essay. And then today I can maybe say 3 bullet points with great certainty. Life is very complicated. Life is very complicated. People are complicated. And so there's so much we don't know that it's great to know certain things, but to also feel very confident to say, I don't know. I have no idea. I don't have a clue about that. Ask somebody else.
Do you believe in luck?
Luck. I believe in being ready. Picasso has this wonderful saying that he says that, yes, inspiration exists, but it should find you working. and there's something about, I think, interesting things, call them lucky things, bad luck, good luck, happen around us all the time. Are we ready for them? Are we ready to notice and sort of reach out to something? Are we open to something that's coming our way? Because I think we are surrounded by so much. I mean, is this making sense? We're surrounded by so very much, and the question is, what do we do with that? There's so many opportunities around us. So I believe in luck to a certain extent. I also believe that we make our own luck by taking opportunities or not. Partly, and again, maybe just to, this, I think I'm extremely aware of my own mortality. I'm extremely aware that, and I also believe pretty strongly, again, what do I know? That nothing much happens after. I'm aware of my mortality. And so I think that on the one hand, I take life very seriously. Things are very important. On the other hand, they're not that important. In the end, we're all going to pass anyway. And after a while, nobody's going to remember us anyway. And so take risks. What's the worst thing that can happen? Like, whatever.
So do you...
No, it's a veered off topic here.
No. Two things on that. I'm curious, would you consider yourself lucky? And I'm also curious, because you mentioned at some point we're going to be forgotten anyway. Are you concerned about your legacy? Do you think about your legacy? Are you... yeah.
Well, first of all, so yes and no. On to the next question. No, I think I consider myself extremely lucky in the sense that, just in the sense of probabilities, right? There are people born all over the world. I am extremely lucky in that I've always or almost always had something to eat. I was educated. I was born in a free part of the world. I had, a family and parents. Nobody hit me. Nobody beat me up when I was a kid. There are so many horrible things that can happen to you that in that sense, I'm lucky. I'm already 58 and I'm still alive and I'm still healthy. That is awesome. Many people aren't. And so in that sense, I feel very lucky. I have an amazing wife. I have an amazing daughter. I have some very good friends. I mean, these are all things that we can take for granted. I feel very lucky. There's a good word in English. I feel fortunate. It's interesting. Good luck and good fortune. I feel very fortunate and lucky and privileged to have all these things, and I'm aware, and I feel very thankful for all of them. Legacy. I don't know. I think that I would like for people to say some nice things about me at my funeral, crack a couple jokes, and then I don't really legacy in the sense, people. Some people are so full of themselves, and yet, let's be real. I mean, do you know the name? And this is it's a trick question. The answer is no. Do you know the name of President Truman's Secretary of Agriculture?
Of course not.
Of course not. It's possible that and it was a him, that his grandchildren do. Grandpa was Secretary of Agriculture. Great. At the time, this man probably was so full of his own secretariness of agriculture. He was the Secretary of Agriculture. Somebody else, was the ambassador to Vietnam, the ambassador to France in 1895. Oh my God. Who cares 100 years later? Were you a good person? Did you, have a loving family? Did you have good friends? sometimes I read these amazing profiles in New Yorker, for example, right? You get these amazing articles about someone, and you know that article in that week sort of made that person's day, that person's month, that person's year. Everyone who knows that person is going to be so excited. 5 years later, they will remember this. Most of us will have forgotten. How many profiles of people you don't know can you keep in your head? So life just moves on, and I think what matters really is what we do every day with that day that we have. After that, who knows? I don't know.
It's a great answer. I appreciate that answer.
Thank you.
I'd like to bring things in here because I think we're at I think we've covered a lot of ground in a really, really positive way. Before I ask you one final question, where would you like folks to go find you, your organization? What do you want them to do right now as soon as they finish listening to my outro? But after that, where would you like them to go?
Go to idealist.org any day to find sort of great things to do where you are. Specifically now, go to idealist.org/99, just the two numbers, 99, to see what's happening today, or 1010 or 1111 to see what's happening in the next few months. There'll be this interactive map of the world every month where you can basically see what people are doing, or you can just very quickly add a little pin, a little dot, and say what you want to do wherever you are and have people join you or not. So just go to idealist.org and then go from there.
We will make sure that everything we mentioned is in the show notes. I'm also going to make sure that there's a direct link to the Idealist logo, because you mentioned earlier, and that's the one thing we're kind of missing doing an audio podcast, which is your logo, well, our logo, as you like to say, the Idealist logo that we've all. Yes, please. For the video that may or may not be on YouTube.
I don't know if you can see this circle. It's basically yellow, blue, and green circle.
It's beautiful.
That people can just make on their own, or you can just take it. That's the basic idea. It's basically a yellow circle surrounded by a green and a blue circle, and that sort of does it.
And it looks like it's been painted, and it's beautiful. Just out of curiosity, I know that on idealist.org you can download it and use it for anything in various formats. But also, do you have available? I didn't see. Have you made it available on T-shirts, stickers, anything for people to purchase? Is that out there?
We don't want to we don't make any money out of this, but people were asking us for this, and so we told them two things. One, either go and make your own. It's easy and cheap and just whatever. Two, there's this online store that we have on a site called Zazzle. Zazzle with two Z's. Zazzle.com/idealist. You can go there and you can take a T-shirt, you can take earrings. The logo lends itself to all kinds of cute things.
That's great. I was looking because I was like, I want a sticker, I want a T-shirt.
So I'll send you Zazzle.com/idealist. Again, we don't make any money on this. It's just a delivery mechanism. But you can go or you can copy ideas from there and just make your own. We're happy for you to do that. This is not for us, it's for you.
And I think that the logo is such an important part of that 3-step process, because you had mentioned earlier labels, and a lot of times we speak about labels in a very negative connotation, and here's a way that you've kind of taken labels back from their negative connotation and said, if you can put this, if everybody's got that logo on, I know that you're trying to do good in the world, and you got something here.
Yeah, I mean, just maybe one last thing here, which I think that one concept that may be important here is the idea of a bridging label, right? So if I say that I'm from religion X or country X and you're from religion Y or country Y, that's pretty exclusive. I can't be a Catholic Muslim. It doesn't work that way. And if you're a Muslim and I'm a Catholic, or if I'm Jewish and you're a Buddhist, well, we're different, right? But if suddenly I say, well, I'm a swimmer, like, ooh, I'm a swimmer too. We can both be swimmers across our differences, and that becomes for us a bridging identity. And so you can use these labels to basically pull people apart, or you can have a bridging label that takes all our differences and says, oh, but we all are scientists, or we all love music. In this case, no, we're all idealists. We all believe in freedom and dignity. And so we can use that label to actually come together as opposed to be pulled apart. So in that way, it can also be helpful, I think.
I love that, and it just makes me think of an example Simon Sinek gave once. I mean, everything he says is wonderful, but he gave this great example where he said, if you're in New York and you meet someone else who's from New York, who cares? You can't just be like, "Hi, I'm also from New York." They'll be like, "Go away, I'm busy," and it's New York. But if you're in Spain and you hear an American accent and you go, "Hey, I'm from New York," and they go, "I'm from New York," you go, suddenly you're best friends because you're further away from your home base, the same label. And if you're even further away and you hear an accent, you go, "I'm from New York," and they go, "I'm from California." That just being from the U.S. is enough. And the further away you get from your comfort zone, the less the specific the labels have to be. And I think that this logo you've got is something like that gives everybody a chance. So
thank you so much.
It's great. I've got one final question if you've got got time.
Of course.
All right. We bounced around so many different ideas, and one of the things I keep thinking about is we were talking really early on about education. We were talking about kind of young people, young professionals, and you were talking about passion and following and ideas and all this. So if you could cap this off with just one piece of advice to the young adults, the young professionals that really want to make a positive change. They want to make an impact. They want to leave behind something good in the world. They're not sure what they're doing yet, which is so common for young professionals, young adults right now. What would you tell them?
Wow, you caught me here. One piece of advice. I think, there's so many cliches out there, and your mom has told you most of them. If you emphasize this issue of young people, I would actually say be patient. Be patient with yourself. There's something, when we were 22, 23, 24, 25, there's this conviction we have, it's almost embedded in our brains, that every decision we make is somehow final and irreversible. It's going to affect our whole life. And then by the time you're 30, you realize that was BS, that was absolutely wrong, that it doesn't, that if I'll give you a specific example. You think you want to be a doctor, so you go and you study, sort of medicine, and you spend 3 years doing that. And you're like, you know what? I made a horrible mistake. I don't want to be a doctor. Well, drop it. And what happens is this feeling of like, oh my God, but I just threw away 3 years of my life. And no, just throw it away. You're 23 or 24. By the time you're 28, it won't matter. And so this idea of just, it's okay. Things are going to work themselves out, and just be loving and patient with yourself. Just give yourself that time. Love yourself as much as the people who love you love you. Don't love yourself less than they do. Just be patient and loving with yourself, and the rest will usually take care of itself.
Ami, thank you so much for taking the trip out to chat today. I've really, really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you
so much. You're great. Thank you so much.